Hello, everybody. This is GeorgeAnn Hughes, and this is the Byte Show. And we have Joseph Farrell on the line, and he is going to talk to us about a lot of things tonight. Yeah.
Well, I don't have a prepared agenda.
Well, I don't either, really.
This is your show.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
This is your idea.
Well, you have something happening in your life that necessitates some extra funds.
Well, no, not necessarily. It's just I've been dealing with a situation, and then on top of that, the computer went all nuts on me last week, and I think after some days of fighting a temptation to take a rubber sledgehammer.
Why rubber?
Yes, exactly.
You steal.
Exactly. I was definitely in touch with my inner Hitler during those days.
I know how that goes, Joe.
Oh, yeah.
It is terrible to have to
deal
it
really is.
With all that.
I think it may be back to normal. Cross your fingers, hope to die. The old. But no, it's I'm okay. I mean, it just took. I don't know what I don't even know what I did.
Oh, gee. It was something with the router.
I don't know if that was it, or if I just after the curses and imprecations, it started working again. So.
Oh gosh. Oh.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get off on all that, but
well, that's okay. That's okay. We got to know how you're doing, and that's part of it. Lately, there's been stuff coming out about the Vatican Bank and the Pope, and
oh boy, yeah.
Yeah, what do you have to share with us on that?
Oh boy. I knew that you were going to ask me that, and this one, I'm literally walking on eggshells on this one.
Okay.
There's things that this connects to that are at least, in my opinion, 2 centuries old.
Oh.
And I'll, at some point, I may have to ask you to pause the recording, and I'll tell you the details, and then you can unpause the recording.
Okay. Clandestine stuff.
Clandestine stuff. The Vatican Bank, the Institution for Religious Works, Instituto per Religione, IOR, it's abbreviated, is the official name of the so-called Vatican Bank. And since the Vatican is a sovereign state, it more or less is it's a peculiar institution in terms of international banking.
Yes. Because
it functions as a central bank in a certain sense, but it also functions as a prime bank. In other words, one of these very large, multinational, multi-billion-dollar banks like Citibank or Barclays or Lloyd's or some of these, very major banks that we're familiar with in Europe and America. And in addition to this, it's a clearing bank. Mm-hmm. And it has always had an association with the European elite and with the European underground.
Yeah.
It was, to give you the more immediate modern background, it was closely associated with an American archbishop by the name of Paul Marcinkus back in the 1980s.
Oh, my.
Paul Marcinkus, in turn, was the head of Pope John Paul II's security detail. He had been under investigation, apparently, by Pope John Paul I, the Albino Cardinal Luciani that was elected after Paul VI.
Yeah.
And Luciani, of course, has himself a very interesting background. He was the Cardinal Archbishop and Patriarch of Venice. And we know the history of that city.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we do. Book to be coming out shortly, folks.
Good.
But anyway, Cardinal Luciani was, in my opinion, a very decent man. And I suspect, like many others, that once he became Pope, he was just appalled at how far and wide the rot had proceeded. Mm-hmm. And he apparently had been determined to do something about it. Now, let's remember that when Paul VI dies, and of course Paul VI was Giovanni Cardinal Montini, who was elected Pope on the death of Pope John XXIII, who in turn, to give their actual name, John XXIII, was Angelo Cardinal Roncalli. Yeah. Now, the reason I'm giving you all the names is these are very important. Okay. Okay. This is kind of a modern Roman Catholic hidden ecclesiastical history lesson. But Luciani was elected right at the time that the P2 scandal was still tracing out some seismic shocks inside of Italy. Mm-hmm. And for people who don't remember what P2 was, this was Logge Propaganda Due, that was founded by an Italian businessman and Freemason and fascist by the name of Licio Gelli. All right?
Yeah.
And Logge Propaganda Due, or P2 as it's known for short, was this Masonic lodge in Italy that had recruited virtually every high-ranking military and intelligence officer and significant figures within Italian finance and Italian multinational corporations, Olivetti and Fiat and so on and so forth. So in other words, this was a lodge that had deeply, deeply penetrated the Italian military intelligence industrial complex, all right? Mm-hmm. And when it was exposed, some of the members were also found to have been very high-ranking clergy within the Vatican. Now, this has never been proven, but some people suspect that there was some sort of relationship between P2 and this Archbishop Paul Marcinkus that headed the Vatican Bank, because Marcinkus in turn and Licio Gelli in turn had one associate in common, and this was the notorious Italian banker Michele Sindona, who was, of course, a high-ranking mafia capo. He had bought several enterprises throughout Europe, in Italy, and in the United States. And, of course, when his bank in the United States collapsed, he was indicted by the U.S. federal government for fraud. Well, Michele Sindona was a member of this P2 lodge.
Joseph, somewhere I had a news item from years ago that Hillary Clinton was involved in P2.
Well, you've got to understand that we're getting into stuff here that spins out in so many directions that you can take my most recent book, Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, and see that P2 even spins into this, spins into the post-war NATO stay-behind guerrilla units, the so-called Gladio units, and so on and so forth. But in any case, Michele Sindona is the contact person that overlaps the circles surrounding Archbishop Marcinkus in the Vatican Bank, and then in turn the P2G lodge with Licio Gelli. Now, the Vatican Bank, the Istituto Opere Religione, was founded after the Concordat in 1922 between Benito Mussolini's Italy and the Vatican. Now, what this Concordat did was, you have to go all the way back to the pontificate of Pius IX. Giovanni Cardinal Mastai Ferretti was Pius IX's actual name. And Mastai Ferretti began his pontificate as a kind of liberal, because he was at that time, the Papal States still existed. You still had a sovereign country called the Papal States that was run directly by the Pope as a head. And you can go online and find pictures of Pius IX on his papal train, at the back of the train, blessing his troops.
Oh, boy.
Now, all of this, of course, was swept away during the Italian unification, the revolution with Garibaldi and Mazzini and all these people. And, of course, what they did when they unified Italy, they did it under the Kingdom of Sardinia. So you had the House of Savoy, Victor Emmanuel, and so on, taking over, the entire Kingdom of Italy, essentially. And at the end of World War II, of course, you have, World War I, you have Benito Mussolini leading the fascists in their march on Rome, and Victor Emmanuel, acceding to a Mussolini government. So this is an important point for people to remember. The Papal States having been wiped out by Italian unification, this was when Pius IX decided to quit being a liberal, and he became an arch-conservative. This was the Pope who pushed for the formal definition of papal infallibility at the First Vatican Council.
Wow.
All right. So this guy has a really interesting career himself, and I'm not even going to get into that until the new book is out.
Oh,
all right.
Okay. Oh, gee.
But I'll tell you offline what some of this is.
Oh.
But I don't want to say anything about it until the book is out.
Okay.
Giovanni Mastai Ferretti, of course, when the Papal States cease existing and are incorporated, by force of arms into the Kingdom of Italy. Well, at this point, the Vatican's temporal power, the papacy's temporal power, is completely erased, and Pius IX decides, well, I'm just going to impose myself into a self-imposed exile. So he stays in the Apostolic Palace, in Rome, and basically sulks, and doesn't go out after this point. And then, of course, has himself and all his successors proclaimed infallible at Vatican I. And if you want an interesting read about that council sometime. Because, and this is an important part of the story, at Vatican I, there was a group of German bishops, essentially led by a very, very scholarly bishop by the name of Joseph Hefele, all right, Hefele. And Bishop Hefele was one of these German 19th century ecclesiastical history scholars. I mean, this man was incredibly erudite.
Yeah.
And, of course, his scholarship had convinced him that these aspects of the papal claims simply weren't based in any historical tradition whatsoever. In other words, they weren't Catholic.
Yeah.
And, he wasn't the only such bishop. It was a group of bishops from southern Germany, Austria, even would now be northern Croatia, were opposed all along to Pius IX and to the definition of infallibility. It was really the Jesuits, the Latin American cardinals, the Italian cardinals, and so on and so forth. The French had, the Archbishop of Paris, Archbishop Dupanloup, was also opposed to the definition of infallibility, and for the same reason, because it wasn't really part of genuine Catholic tradition.
Right.
So you've got to bear this in mind. Pius IX, while he's holed up in the Vatican under self-imposed exile, decides to hold this council to proclaim himself infallible. And he's meeting opposition from the bishops of southern Germany, the German part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and certain quarters from France.
Oh,
okay?
Oh, boy. Yeah.
And you got to remember this. This is part of the story.
Okay.
All right. Now, the Papal States were never, of course, reformed. But when Mussolini takes power, he, in 1922, signs a concordat with the Vatican. This had been negotiated for quite some time. And as part of this concordat, he recognizes diplomatically the Vatican City State as it's constituted now, as a rump state, essentially, of the old Papal States.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, this confers a unique status to the Vatican, rather similar to the City of London inside of Great Britain or the District of Columbia inside of this country, except that it's a fully sovereign nation, all right? Can issue passports, it can have diplomatic immunity, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And the other thing that Mussolini does is he pays reparations to the Vatican in the form of 90 million gold lira, all right, to the Vatican as reparations for the loss of the Papal States. It is that payment that is the basis for the Vatican's entry into the modern world of high finance.
Oh, boy.
It's at this juncture that the Vatican Bank is founded. And if you read the first novel of Father Malachi Martin, called Vatican, all right?
Mm-hmm.
The reason I'm giving you all of these names earlier is because you will, in researching them, you will discover who the characters, the fictional characters are in Father Malachi's book that he's writing about. Now, in the book, Father Malachi, if you read the book closely, you'll discover, if you know the details of modern Roman Catholic Church history carefully and in detail, you'll discover that the details in the novel are dead on, such that when details in the novel are supplied that are not historically known, the suspicion tends to be created that what is being said in the novel actually occurred.
Yeah.
All right.
I've read that novel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that he says in the novel is that as a result of this concordat and for them, the huge sum of money that was turned over to the Vatican, which it immediately began to invest, but there was a problem. The Vatican had to gain entry into the world of high finance.
Mm-hmm.
And to do so, it struck what Father Malachi called the bargain.
Mm-hmm.
And the bargain was that it made a secret kind of peace with the high Masonic and financial powers of Europe.
Oh, boy.
To gain entry into finance.
Mm.
So in other words, what Father Malachi is saying is that all the stuff that came out during the P2 scandal in the 1980s, the death of Roberto Calvi at
Yes.
Blackfriars Bridge, the stepping down of Archbishop Marcinkus as the head of the Vatican Bank, what he's really saying is that all of this is a direct result of this concordat and secret bargain that was struck as a result of it.
Oh,
all right?
boy.
Now, the reason I tend to think that Father Malachi is correct is, first of all, at the end of this progression, you have a Masonic involvement with the P2 Lodge.
Yeah.
Now, this is the part where I might have to ask you to pause the tape recorder very briefly.
Okay.
Okay? Tell me when we're paused.
Okay, I'll pause it.
All right.
Yikes. Oh, my gosh. Oh. That's killer stuff, Joe.
Yeah.
Jeez. Whoa.
So yeah, this is what's at the end of the story, and then at the beginning of the story we have what I just told you off the air.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now let's go even further back than that into history.
Okay.
In my period right around the turn of the millennium, I was in regular correspondence with a relatively well-known Roman Catholic, and I just very directly asked him if Vatican II had been hijacked. Now, you know, this was the council at which the Roman Catholic Church ceased looking Roman Catholic. You know? You know, and I'm not trying to pick on Roman Catholics here. You know, most of my family is. So, you know, I was the black sheep of the family. I didn't buy any of it, so I ended up in the Eastern Orthodox Church. But anyway, the Second Vatican Council is part of this story in the following way, and I know I'm just going around huge amounts of Harvey's barn here to answer a very simple question, but you really don't understand what's happening unless you have all of this background.
Yeah.
At the Second Vatican Council, Pope Paul the 23rd, or pardon me, John the 23rd, had called this council to, you know, institute some long overdue reforms, like putting the Mass into the vernacular, all right?
Yeah.
Now, the idea at the time was, well, we're just going to translate the Mass. What they ended up with was an entirely new Mass.
Yeah.
Okay? It wasn't really so much the old Mass retranslated. It was the old Mass hacked to pieces and then reassembled by a committee and translated into horrible, you know,
yes.
It's just pedestrian if you remember the old ways.
Yeah, I do.
But in any case, what happened during the first session of the council was you had, now get this, a group of bishops from southern Germany and Austria and a few from France show up at the Vatican Council, and they were successful in throwing out the Curia's agenda for the council and substituting their own. So in other words, the entire council was hijacked by a group of bishops that called itself the Rhine Group.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, there's much more to this story, because if you're familiar with the history of Catholicism in those areas during the 18th century, there's something significant going on.
Oh.
And that's called the Bavarian Illuminati.
Yeah.
And why do I mention that? Because if you look at the roles of members of this secret society, the founder himself, Adam Weishaupt, was what? He was a professor of canon law at the Catholic University of Ingolstadt.
Oh.
Okay, he had been trained by the Jesuits. He in turn recruited several prominent clergymen into his association. A fellow by the name of Karl Barth, not the famous Protestant theologian. Several canons in the Roman Church, several prominent Lutheran theologians, and there's even a suggestion where Weishaupt says himself that I've managed to recruit some of the most famous divines of the University of Göttingen. Now, if you sniff around at that time in history, there's only two very famous divines at that time at the University of Göttingen. One is a fellow by the name of Johann Michaelis, and the other is his student, Johann Eichhorn. And if you know anything about biblical scholarship, these were two of the very most influential people in the development of the so-called documentary hypothesis, that I talk about in Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men.
Yeah.
In other words, these were guys spearheading the idea that Moses didn't even write most of the books of Moses attributed to him. These were written much later by hidden elites using a variety of sources. Now, I'm not, I don't particularly buy that theory. I don't particularly reject the theory. I think there's a little bit of truth in it, and I think there's a lot of typical kind of early 19th century, late 18th century German idealism behind the theory. All right?
Yeah.
But in any case, what my point here is, and I hope everybody follows what I'm saying, is that you had a secret society busily recruiting people with these kinds of ideas because the whole goal of this society was to do what? It was to overturn princes and priests. In other words, the governments and religious propping of those governments in Europe, and to create a revolution that would eventually sweep them aside.
Oh, my goodness.
So in other words, 200 years later, you have essentially that agenda triumph at Vatican II. Now, the reason I say that with a little confidence is that the Archbishop that Paul VI, who, Giovanni Cardinal Montini, put in charge of instituting the religious and liturgical reforms that the Council had decreed at Vatican II, was a fellow by the name of Archbishop Annibale Bugnini. And he was subsequently discovered to be, guess what, a Mason.
Oh, my gosh.
And this was after Paul VI had already disseminated the new Mass.
Joseph, gosh, back in the 80s, sometime, I was reading the Dallas Morning News, and in there, kind of hidden back in the paper, in a little tiny column, Vatican embraces Masons.
Yeah, well, the reason why was because the Masons had already infiltrated it.
Yeah.
Now, let's go further. Let's just stop and sum up what we've got here. We've got really a story that's 200 years old at least.
Yeah.
And we've got a story of the hierarchical machinery of the world's largest Christian religious institution literally being hijacked by something that to a certain extent is altogether foreign to it.
Yeah.
Okay. This is the reason that ultimately I think you, and then of course you have that little bit of information that I told you when we paused the recording.
Oh boy. Wow.
And that's a wow.
Gee.
That's a wow.
That'll be in the book.
Yeah, that'll be in the book, but
okay.
I don't want to say anything like that until it's out there and people can go look for themselves.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is not something that you just trot out there on a radio show.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
But, the end result, the bottom line here is, what I'm arguing here is that the context certainly seems to suggest that what Father Malachi was writing about in his novel Vatican, with this idea of a bargain that ultimately came to eat out the heart and soul, really, of Roman Catholicism, was the result of this bargain with the Masons as a result of the Concordat with Mussolini. Oh. Now, we have to remember something else here. Paul VI, the Pope that finished out the Second Vatican Council, again, his name was Giovanni Cardinal Montini. And he had been, of course, the Cardinal Archbishop of Milan.
Yeah.
But here's something that most people need to remember about him. During the Second World War, then Archbishop Montini was working in the Vatican Secretariat of State. And therefore, he was one of many of the hierarchs within that particular department of the Vatican government was instrumental in the rat line operations, smuggling out Italian fascists and Nazis and Croatian Ustashi and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Another very prominent figure was Bishop Alois Hudal in Croatia, and another one was the Argentinian Cardinal, Gianni, I think was his name, and then, of course, Eugene Cardinal Tisserand that I mentioned in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. Mm-hmm. So now, what's the significance of the Vatican Bank? It's very simple. The Vatican Bank was the transit point for all of those CIA funds that were transferred into Italy during 1948 to ensure that the communists did not win in that year's elections. So in other words, it has always been a kind of money laundering facility to and from Italy for intelligence agencies. Now, whenever you're doing that sort of thing, that puts you in a position to be blackmailed by them. Now, let's remember in this respect who Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger was.
Yeah.
Ratzinger was John Paul II's, so to speak, doctrinal hitman. All right, he dressed up in conservative clothes.
Yeah.
But during Vatican II, he was a simple priest who had come to the council with his bishop, archbishop, and so on, as their scholarly peritus, as they were called. These were the priests that were behind the scenes at the Second Vatican Council, that were the periti, the experts in theology, guiding their bishops and archbishops and cardinals. Mm-hmm. So in other words, Ratzinger was part of this Rhine group that was leading, if I can put it in these terms, leading the ecclesiastical revolution. So let's remember something that Ratzinger, the traditionalist, did. We all remember the kind of peppery old French archbishop by the name of Marcel Lefebvre, who founded a Roman Catholic traditionalist movement that adhered to the Old Mass, to the Latin Tridentine Mass. In fact, my mom used to live in Topeka, Kansas. Well, just about 20 miles west of Topeka, there's a little town in Kansas called St. Mary's, and it's full of these kinds of traditionalist Roman Catholics that still use the Tridentine Latin Mass for their worship. Well, remember, it was Ratzinger that had Lefebvre and his associates excommunicated. When Lefebvre wanted to consecrate bishops, he was getting old, and he needed somebody to continue, episcopal ministrations to this group of people. Yeah. And of course, the Vatican refused.
Yeah, naturally.
And naturally, when you're instituting a revolution, the last thing you want is to have the old ways around. With any sort of official sanction or approval. So this is Ratzinger. It's now coming out that in addition to all these Vatican Bank things, and I hope I've provided kind of a sketch of how all of this is intertwined with some, very murky secret history and so on. But, the other thing we have to remember is that Ratzinger is covering up for, apparently now, during the pontificate of John Paul II, he was also more or less in charge of overseeing all these sex scandal cases. Yeah. And to the point that, there are now stories coming out of Italy that Italian prosecutors are trying to indict him.
Yeah.
And that, he may have to just hole up in the Vatican, like Pius IX and to avoid being arrested.
Yeah.
So where all this is going, I don't know. I can tell you this much. It is, in my opinion, all but probable that this resignation was forced, that this was a blackmailing event, because let's remember the other aspect of what we're dealing with here. We have the so-called prophecies of Malachi, right, of the popes. And these are supposedly mottos, although, if you do a little digging on the prophecies of Malachi, you'll discover that the current version was actually kind of a 16th century forgery that, kind of like the donation of Constantine.
Yeah.
That became one of the bases of papal power and claims. But how to make this clear to people? The prophecies basically prophesy all the popes of the Roman Church on the basis of little mottos, kind of like the mottos on a coat of arms.
Yeah.
Well, Benedict XVI, that particular pope in this line of popes, the motto was Gloria Olivae, the glory of the olive, which years prior to Benedict's election, Roman Catholics that would talk about this postulated or hypothesized that this referred to somebody from the Benedictine order because that's their association, the olive, all right?
Yeah.
Well, Benedict duly obliged them, of course, by choosing the name Benedict when he became pope. Well, in these prophecies, there is only one more pope, and that's Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman.
Yeah.
Now, this pope is, according to the prophecy, going to feed and judge his flock amid great tribulations.
Yeah.
Now, this is a tailor-made prophecy for apocalypse mongering.
Yeah. It sure is.
Sure is.
And I've heard plenty of it.
And you've heard, we all have by now, ever since Benedict made his announcement.
Yeah.
And of course, you've got every kind of millennialist going nuts right now, Protestant or Catholic.
Yeah.
And I'll get to my word for the wise in a minute. But isn't it interesting that right now the most prominent papabile, and that's what they call a strong candidate or papal contender is papabile.
Yeah.
The strongest contender right now happens to be the Pope from Africa by the name of Peter Cardinal Turkson. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So, I think, like I wrote in my blog, I think this is one to watch because, the easiest way to fulfill prophecy is to control its invention.
Yes.
And if you can't control that, control its interpretation.
Oh, yes.
And, I wish everybody with a millennial checklist would remember this because the elites have the same checklist.
Yes.
So my point is, and this is something that I don't want a bunch of angry emails about. I said this on my News and Views the other day. And I have a blog coming up about this. My point here is, everybody has this checklist. It is possible, therefore, to stage fulfillments of various differing types of prophecy all at once.
Yeah.
So in other words, a word to the wise, my friend, the fulfillment is the deception. I'll say that one more time so that it really sinks in for all you Hal Lindsey, Charles Stanley, Jerry Falwell, Victor Thorne or Horn or whatever his name is, for Arthur Bloomfield, Cyrus Schofield, and for those of you who are post-millennialists or amillennialists, for the John Calvins, the Oliver Cromwells, the Christian Dominionists, all down the line. If you are in a school of millennialism, beware.
Yeah.
Because the fulfillment is the deception.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I say any kind of millennialism, I'm not just talking about the premillennial, pre-tribulational rapture crowd. I'm also talking about that belief in the Reformed tradition and within many streams of Roman Catholicism. The belief that it will be the church which sets up and establishes the kingdom of God before Christ's return.
Yeah.
So in other words, what you're dealing with in those schools is theocracy.
Yes.
Now, isn't it interesting that Benedict the 16th, in his many statements on what a nice idea global governance is, also came out with the statement that, gee, it would be a good idea for that global government to have a global moral consultant.
Oh.
Now, where have we heard this before?
Yeah.
From popes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking particularly of Boniface VIII and a medieval papal bull called Unum Sanctum, which you don't get a much more right out there statement of papal claims than Boniface VIII. Because in Unum Sanctum, he just comes right out and says, we declare that it is altogether necessary for salvation for every human creature to be subject to the Roman Pontiff.
Oh, yeah.
Now, folks, I'm gonna drop one out there for you on this one. That's called in law a claim of right. So if you're hearing little subtle alarm bells going off in your head thinking, oh, gee, I wonder if that has anything to do with all that logic of sacrifice and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Bingo!
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yep.
So, folks, there's my warning for the moment, and after, golly now, 40 minutes of talking, I hope I answered your question.
Oh, my gosh, Joseph. That's just totally ominous. Oh.
Well, it's not good.
No, it's not.
It's not good.
Certainly not.
And my point, folks, is it's all theater.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, the point that you make, that if you know the prophecy, you can
fulfill it.
Yeah.
You can stage it.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Theater, theater, theater.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
There's a little hook in this, but I'm not going to talk about that tonight.
Okay.
That's for off in the future sometime. Got other things to write and get out there before we do that.
Well, here I ran across a news article, slush fund accounts of major U.S. politicians identified and seized at Vatican Bank.
Yes. Well, that's exactly what I told you earlier when I said that it was used as a point of contact, an international kind of money laundering clearinghouse for various Western intelligence services and so on and so forth. So, this is just the modern version of something that's been going on since the end of World War II, when they used the Vatican Bank to shuttle CIA money into Italy to influence the 48 elections. This has been going on for decades.
Wow.
This means, to put it in terms that I put it in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, this means that the Vatican Bank was an integral part of that hidden system of finance, particularly that part of that system that had to deal with or interface with intelligence, with the underground criminal syndicates and so on and so forth.
Oh.
It's the old, GeorgeAnn, it's the old Babylon's banksters paradigm. It's the association of the financial oligarchy with the temple.
Oh, gee. Yeah.
Now, let's remember that this strong contender, this African cardinal, Peter Cardinal Turkson, is one of the people within the Vatican calling for not only a global government, but a global central bank.
No.
Now, this is coming from, let's remember, an institution that in the form of Boniface VIII lays out a universal claim of right.
Oh, brother. Gee, what these people won't do.
This is all very old. I mean, we could go all night here on what I think is going on, but I'd sound like a kook because I have to write the books and supply the footnotes. so that at least people can see, well, there is a case to be made for arguing like this.
Well, we all know that you're not a kook.
Well, no, we don't know that.
Gee.
I could be a kook with a lot of footnotes.
Well,
time will tell.
They say that the source of these funds for these accounts in almost every instance was found to be the U.S. Treasury.
GeorgeAnn, again.
And the beneficiaries of the covert Vatican accounts include Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, and
sure.
each of their children, Michelle Obama's mother, all the Bushes, and all the Clintons.
Sure. This is not surprising to me. This, again, the Vatican Bank is, in my opinion, has been since at least the end of World War II, a vital component of this hidden system of finance.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is a vital component of something much older and deeper. A part of that I hinted to you in what I said off the air.
Yeah. Well, Joseph, they even say that Joe Biden, Timothy Geithner, Janet Napolitano, and several U.S. senators, including Mitch McConnell, several U.S. congressmen, including John Boehner.
Come to the point.
Several U.S. military chiefs of staff, the U.S. provost
marshal. Yeah, we got the details.
They've all got accounts.
Yeah, well, again.
and chief justices.
Okay, but again, the details don't negate. They just add the icing. It's again part of this hidden system of finance. When you're managing slush funds, this was what I was trying to get at earlier. When you're managing slush funds, the blackmail goes two ways.
Oh boy, so gee.
See, ain't that neat?
Oh gee. Oh my God.
And I mean, you want to be rich and powerful and famous? Look at these people. Just look what miserable, wretched lives they lead and what miserable, wretched creatures they are.
Yeah.
To be doing this nonsense.
Oh. Good grief.
Oh, my,
Well, is this money funneled into the Vatican Bank for these people?
It can be funneled into it. Let's remember what I wrote in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. Who was one of the most notorious war criminals that got off scot-free at the end of the war and had accounts in the Vatican Bank?
Oh.
Emperor Hirohito.
Gee, yes. And
gold. And all of his gold. And gee golly, it's no wonder the Vatican Bank said all along when all of these gold figures began to be questioned by Lord Blackheath in the House of Lords. He was looking at these figures and saying, well, this isn't adding up. And then he even says, right on the floor of the House of Lords, but these figures are just all messed up according to the Vatican Bank.
Oh my gosh.
Well, they ought to know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
This is, GeorgeAnn, this is like, I don't know about you, but I feel kind of like Meg Greenfield, the old columnist that used to write for, what was it, U.S. News and World Report or Newsweek or something, one of those old magazines. Mm-hmm. Well, at the end of the BCCI scandal, she came right out and wrote a column where she was looking back on the long history of all of these scandals, BCCI, savings and loans, and the Franklin Bank scandal and Penn Square Bank, and noticing that the same people are always involved.
Yeah.
They always get off scot-free. Oh. And she came right out and said something to the effect, well, is it just me or is anybody else noticing this is like a bad Mozart opera where everyone is in costume and pretending to be someone else?
Oh, my gosh, Joseph.
It's just like a bad opera libretto. And it really is, I mean, it's to the point that these people are so brazen, blatant, and panicked, and you know, they haven't changed their playbook in centuries.
Yeah.
And they're just parading it now.
Yeah, it's in your face.
It's in your face.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just, you know, we're at the point, you know, GeorgeAnn, when the Pope resigns, the first Pope in, 600 years or something like that. When I heard that, I thought, okay, there's something behind this. I didn't even have to research.
Yeah.
But, you know, you watch these news people and so on. Well, I wonder if there's something behind that. If, you know, well, duh. You know?
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it's huge.
It is, and it's global, and
it's global,
all encompassing.
Well, of course it's global. That's what the papal office claims to be.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, how many times have I said during our files, Joseph, that they're the only company in the world that has embassies in almost every country of the world.
Yes.
What
yes.
amount to embassies?
I used to tell my medieval history students, and I've said this, I think, on your show a couple of times. I used to tell them two things. The first was that the oldest political chancery in the world that has been in continuous operation in the world for 2 millennia is the Vatican.
Yes.
And when you connect it to the old Roman senatorial and bureaucratic families, even longer than that.
Yeah.
And it in turn is connected, if you do a lot of deep digging, to that Babylonian Hebrew kind of complex that the Roman Empire ruled over toward, you know, the turn of the first millennium.
Yeah.
So, you know, even longer than that. So you're dealing with a very old phenomenon. And the second thing you've got to remember about the Vatican is even though it's a tiny city-state, it can operate as a superpower in one very significant way, or actually two possibly, and that's intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it has, as you pointed out, embassies and on-the-ground human presence in almost every corner of the globe.
Yes.
With the probable exceptions of China and Russia, which is why the Vatican dearly wants to get into those countries.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know,
they even have scores of scientists and and astrophysicists people, and just
they have, you know, the Vatican has its papal science councils, just like the Royal Society in England or the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany, or you know, all of these things are, you know, duplicated at the Vatican. You need only think of the famous Renaissance Jesuit Athanasius Kircher to, you know, appreciate that they're deeply, deeply interested in all these things.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it's, you know, this is a significant story, and you know, popes just don't up and resign, particularly for health reasons. This was something very deep. I think it's connected to the Vatican Bank scandal. I think it's connected to activities, blackmail activities surrounding it. I think it's connected to the Vatican sex scandals, you know, the pedophilia scandals and so on and so forth. And I think that even deeper there is that little connection that I mentioned to you on the air, or pardon me, off the air.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Joseph. This is spooky stuff. It
is.
Really is.
Yeah. GeorgeAnn, it's so spooky that most of what I've encountered in my life researching some of these things, most of it I don't ever talk about.
Yeah.
Because it all connects to this.
Oh my gosh.
So, you know, it's very it is very disturbing. But at the same time you have to laugh. Because, like I said, the fulfillment's the deception.
Mhm.
This is huge cosmic theater.
Yeah, yeah.
And in the end, what they're doing will be futile.
Well, look at the EU. it's not doing very well. I mean, French citizens are self-immolating and over financial issues. My God, Joseph.
It's an insanity.
Yeah.
And there are perverted social engineering reasons for the insanity. Just remember, one of the cardinals entering that council is the head of the Pontifical Commission for Global Justice and Peace, or some such thing. I don't remember. And this is the guy calling for a central bank, and following on the steps of a pope who says that a global government's a good idea and it needs to have a global moral consulting authority.
Yeah. Oh.
And we're applying for the job. We've already made our claim to right. We've read that into the record. Way back in the Middle Ages.
Gosh. Well, I'm kind of speechless. I mean,
it leaves you speechless.
Yeah. Well, it is just monstrously huge.
It is.
People can't even begin to fathom how huge.
But remember, it doesn't have to be huge. Archimedes said it. Give me a lever and the fulcrum in the right place, and I can move the world.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't take many people to pull off sweeping changes.
Yeah.
With the right leverage, note the financial term.
Yeah.
And the right position.
Well, Joseph, just because they pass laws like in Washington and other places, in London and et cetera, and the people don't like those laws,
right?
Are they really obliged to follow them?
Well, the standard theological answer has always been that if the law is immoral, no, you're not. The problem has always been, for people, that line is drawn differently, usually, slightly differently for each individual. It's when governments become so oppressive that you either have two courses of action: submit to the tyranny or try and topple it.
Yeah.
But whether the world's going to get to that stage or not, I don't know. But it's interesting to me to note that you have all of these events which to me look increasingly staged.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like.
Like.
Well, there's the Werner von Braun version of the prophecy, and there's the Book of Revelation version of the prophecy that amount to the same thing. You shall see signs and lying wonders in the heavens, and so on.
Yeah. And we can manufacture all that
which ain't that neat.
And
I call those, in Covert Wars, GeorgeAnn, in that book, I called those the technologies of emulation. Why? Because they emulate acts of nature or acts of God.
Yeah. Yeah. Storms, earthquakes, floods, you name it.
Meteors.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we guide meteors?
Well, it depends on when you ask the question.
Oh dear.
If you were to ask the question a couple months or so ago at certain committees that were convened to talk about how we can deal with, asteroid threats, they would have said, yeah, we have the means to divert these things from their course by shooting missiles with big bombs at them and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But if you were to ask the question now, after you have meteors slamming into places in Cuba and
Russia.
And Chelyabinsk near Russia, that's a city of some million people.
Yeah.
A couple of minor changes in the trajectory, and that could have been a major, major tragedy for that country.
Oh, yes. 1,200 people were injured.
Yeah. But here's the problem. Here's the real problem.
Okay.
I heard on Coast last night a caller, Mr. Hoagland was on Coast last night talking about this, and a caller, an American that was living in Chelyabinsk, or somebody called Coast. Now, I don't know if this is true. I don't, there's no way of verifying this, of what he said, but he said that Chelyabinsk, there are Russian air defense missile batteries, around the city, because it apparently is one of the cities that plays a major role in Russia's nuclear industry.
Yeah.
And, nuclear spent fuel storage industry and so on and so forth. And I thought that was, a little too coincidental. And this guy calls in and he said that, there were actually, people heard 2 explosions.
Yeah.
Which, a bolide, if the meteor was a bolide, which is the view that I, largely tend to.
Yeah.
But if it was a bolide, it's not going to explode twice.
Mm-hmm.
So the implication is the Russians were shooting at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, yesterday, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, that nutcase in the Russian Russian Liberal Democratic Party, which is anything but, folks. But anyway, Zhirinovsky came out and said that, this is the USA's latest weapon.
Yeah.
Now,
there's a picture on RT of the thing coming across the sky, and in the white cloud that it's leaving behind, there is a triangular craft.
Well, that may be. I don't know. I haven't seen it, and it's too. The problem here with pictures is it's too easy to Photoshop.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm more interested in what the Russians say they saw and heard.
Yeah.
And right now, that's kind of difficult to get a hold of.
Yes.
But this is why in a court of law, it's always eyewitness or ear witness testimony that takes priority even to photographic evidence. Mm-hmm. This is true of the Kennedy assassination. It's true of anything in court, okay?
Yeah.
The Russians, I think, here the case is that, number one, RT, the Russian news agency that reported Zhirinovsky saying that it was a U.S. weapon. Well, this is Russia's, state-sponsored media, basically.
Yeah.
It's modern Russia's version of what Pravda used to be.
Yes.
Pravda is still around. The Communist Party over there still runs it, operates it, and everything, but it's basically become a tabloid. RT is a very different matter. It's very sophisticated. My feeling, GeorgeAnn, in all honesty, is that the Russians wouldn't have allowed Zhirinovsky to make the statement and then report it.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about.
Because on the one hand, someone that nutty reporting it makes the whole idea look ridiculous. But number two, it's a way of, if this really was an artificial event, and there are a few things that I've heard that make me question it. It doesn't persuade me yet that it was. Mm-hmm. But for them to float that balloon, this isn't the first time they've floated balloons like that. They've also floated the Haiti was.
Yeah.
The Haiti earthquake was a U.S. weapon. They used Hugo Chavez for that. So
I think that Haiti was artificial.
Well, I do too. I do too. But it's one thing for you and me to say it, and it's another thing for a major government to sort of say it through its semi-official media outlet.
Right.
That raises the stakes.
Oh, yeah.
That's where things get murky. Now, do I think the technology exists for such things to be possible? Well, I certainly think that there is a technology that is capable of engineering, triggering, or amplifying naturally occurring earthquakes. I certainly think that technology may possibly, on the slim side, be able to have resonance effects on the sun.
Yeah.
It really is the third thing, is that technology capable of manipulating gravity so that it can literally reach out and scoop up something in space and throw it at somebody?
Yeah.
Does that technology exist? Well, again, let's look at what some of our own scientists and government agencies have been saying. They want to build this thing called rods from God, putting solid tungsten steel alloy rods up in space and literally shooting them down at targets on the Earth and using the kinetic energy to cause blasts of similar size to nuclear weapons without none of the nasty fallout consequences. So they're already talking in terms of using that type of concept. So, and they're certainly talking about ways to divert asteroids from their path to defend the Earth. So could this have been a message? The bottom line is I'm open to the idea. I think it's possible. I think it's interesting that Russia is saying this about that meteor quietly, and again, they may come out with official denials tomorrow, so we're going to be, playing a kind of Roswell story. Well, it was a balloon. No, it was a flying saucer. And we're getting this two different contradictory stories from the same source. Right now, I think that it's most likely a bolide. The other thing that makes me question, however, whether it was a meteor or not, was the fact that the Russians apparently, according to one source, forget which it was, if it was RT or some other foreign news source, said that the Russians deployed some 10,000 policemen to go pick up pieces.
20,000.
20? Okay, it's up to 20 now. Okay. Well, they're mobilizing the Russian army from the sounds of it to go pick up pieces of a meteor. Now, I find that a little suspicious. A bolide or, an exploding meteor, it might have some interesting things in it and even maybe some little space junk and space life and so on and so forth. And, that would be kind of nifty to find. But sending 20,000 people out to collect it, that just doesn't feel right.
Right on.
So I'm thinking, okay, maybe Mr. Putin was woken from his secure and warm slumber in the Kremlin to be told that something is entering our air defense space and it's headed for our nuclear installations at Chelyabinsk. Maybe we ought to shoot this down. And, Mr. Putin, being Mr. Putin, wouldn't hesitate to shoot it down, and that's what happened. So, who knows? If that's the case, then, the Russians are going to, they're going to... At the minimum, what it says to me is the Russians are suspicious of what this was. They're toying with different ideas, and they want pieces of it so they can be awful sure.
Well, I can't blame them for
being
I can't either. Suspicious. Look at the U.S. has funded militant groups in Syria, and Russia is saying no, no, no.
Well, Russia's saying that because Russia has good experience with these so-called color revolutions. The Ukraine, Belarus, and so on and so forth. All of these color revolutions. Well, these, the Ukraine, like it or not, has been a part of modern Russia for quite a long time. And I'm not trying to upset Ukrainians here, but that's just the fact of the matter. The Ukraine, this whole thing, the breakup of the Soviet republics, particularly the Ukraine, the Belarusian Republic, those two areas of European Russia that, again, I'm sorry, were for a long period of time in modern Russian history a part of Russia. This is something that the Kremlin has a lot of experience. They know this U.S.-NATO covert warfare game has been played to the hilt in the wake of the crack-up of the Soviet Union. George H.W. Bush gave solemn assurances to Mikhail Gorbachev that the United States would not seek to expand NATO into those former Soviet republics.
Yeah.
And of course, this is exactly once Gorbachev was out and they put in their stooge Yeltsin, this is exactly what they did.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've got news for these nuts that are, this was the goal of British foreign policy, really since the end of the Reformation and the rise of Great Britain to a world power status.
Yeah.
The only other really major threat it faced on a global scale was Russia. You had this huge, sprawling land empire.
Yeah.
That had been more or less begun by Ivan the Terrible, and endless expansion under the Tsars ever since.
Mm-hmm.
And a government that was efficient enough to hold it all together. The goal had always been to stop it, deny it access to the open oceans, and break it up.
Yeah.
Well, it's really only been since the collapse of the Soviet Union that this thing has been broken up, at least in its European component, which is still its most important component.
Yeah.
It's only been in that period of time that this has really been accomplished.
Wow.
So, this is a geopolitical game that is very, very dangerous because now, a significant country is deciding, hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong with the game we're playing.
Yeah.
We want our gold back, and that's Germany.
Yeah.
And the old saying, third time's the charm.
Oh, boy. Well, Russia just bought a huge
amount of gold. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is what's happening. I think is they're trying. Oh boy, they're playing a very, very difficult geopolitical game.
Yeah.
Russia and China simply are not going to allow the West to have its American-centered unipolar world. That's the bottom line.
Well, I think that's good.
Well, I do too, in a certain way. I certainly don't think that it's good to have certain factions within the Chinese government running it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at least the Chinese are cagey.
Yeah.
They know the West game because they've been playing it with the West for centuries, and the West playbook hasn't really varied that much.
Mm-hmm.
And the Chinese are hardly a stupid people.
Right.
But no, the geopolitical game has changed when Germany decided, we'd better repatriate that gold, because there's been talk at the IMF and so on for quite some time. I did a News and Views from the Nefarium yesterday,
mm-hmm.
on the connection between the plans that the IMF is building for a new kind of reserve currency,
mm-hmm.
based on special drawing rights and so on and so forth. Well, I think what's going on in that context is if that plan doesn't come through, then China and Russia and Germany are in a position to at least create some sort of reserve currency for purposes of their trade.
Yeah.
And if it does go through, on the other hand, then their possession of significant gold reserves gives them a huge say-so in how this new financial arrangement is going to work.
Yeah.
And you can bet your bottom dollar that whatever they dictate, it's not going to be much to the liking of Wall Street or London.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine.
We know how well London reacted to things when Berlin was dictating things a few decades ago.
Oh, my
but when you get Berlin and Moscow and Beijing, saying, this is what we want, there's not going to be much you can do about it other than, saying that, no, you're not going to get this, and, if that's what it comes to, it means war. That's kind of where the options and alternatives lie.
Joseph, I want to get into the city of London, but I want to pause for just a minute.
Oh, good, because I need it.
We're back. Joseph,
Uh-huh.
what makes the British rulers
Mm-hmm.
so murderous, so vicious?
Okay, I'm not understanding who you mean exactly by British rulers. Are we talking about the House of Saxe-Coburg and the House of Windsor?
Yeah.
Or are we talking about the British aristocracy? Who are we talking about
The
when we
British
say...
aristocracy.
Well,
I mean, they seem to have the idea that they can just push anything down anybody's throat.
well, again, by British aristocracy, do we mean, people sitting in the House of Lords? Do we mean the financial oligarchy? Because the two are not necessarily the same. There is, as everybody knows, in Great Britain, an elite, but you can't say that it is entirely composed of the British nobility or the British royal family. There are people involved in their elite that are not.
Right.
Britain has very much the same kind of oligarchical structure we have in this country, although, the difference being that in their country they give titles to those people. Over here, they give them multi-million-dollar bonuses.
Yeah, that's right.
Part of it, GeorgeAnn, comes from the unique position that Great Britain was in at the end of the wars of religion, and more particularly, if you look at the end of the Cromwell Protectorate, and the restoration of the British monarchy under Charles II. If you look at what's going on there, Britain is in a unique position vis-a-vis the other European powers. And there really is only one other European power at that time that has the ability to challenge Great Britain on the globe, and that's France. And of course, this is what they do. If you look at world history from the beginning of the reign of Charles II down to the Napoleonic Wars, this whole period, the 7 Years' War, the War of the Spanish Succession, the French and Indian War, which is part of a much larger, truly world war between those two nations. Britain, as a result of this period, comes out having to maintain this global empire, and this empire is a trading empire. So it's exactly like Venice on a much larger scale. And as a result, they have to play this balance of power diplomacy in terms of their relationships with continental Europe. And this has always made, the British appear to be duplicitous and underhanded and Byzantine and cunning, perfide Albion, the French like to say, the perfidious Albion. That's part of it. It's just simply the geopolitical position that Britain was in. It's certainly the strongest world power at the time, but faced with, the continent of Europe right across the English Channel, it's faced, first with France and Austria, and then, once Germany and Italy are unified, with two newcomers that are also powerful nations. And then, of course, Russia, which is which is the other problem. So Britain has always played these geopolitical games because they've had to. This is the same kind of thinking that was behind the British post-World War II nuclear deterrent. They had to have their own independent deterrent to be able to keep their position at the negotiating table of power. And it was, the same logic behind General de Gaulle and the French nuclear deterrent.
I met him.
I know you met President de Gaulle. So that's part of it. I think there's a deeper story in the case of some of the British nobility. I think there is a deeper story in the case of certain aspects of the branches of the royal family. British diplomacy in the 19th century is very peculiar because you see a very quiet, though very palpable policy of trying to intermarry into all the royal houses of Europe. This is how this is how you end up with Kaiser Wilhelm being related to Queen Victoria, who's related to Tsar Nicholas and the kings of Greece, and the Dutch royal house, and so on and so forth. They've got all of these intermarriages.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't work out too well in World War I, but it was the old medieval idea, applied in modern times. Mm. And it worked no better in modern times than it did in the Middle Ages. I keep saying, folks, their playbook isn't very up to date. But
it sure isn't.
But I do think there's a deeper story to some aspects of the British aristocracy and some aspects of the various royal houses. And that they do tie, if you trace carefully, they do tie to a network of relationships that in turn go back to Venice via the Fugger banking family in Germany, to some other banking families in Italy, largely in Genoa, in Florence, and Venice, up to the Dutch and Amsterdam.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, when the English bring over William Stadtholder of the Netherlands into England, the so-called Glorious Revolution, and he becomes William III, his almost instant act is to found the Bank of England.
Oh, gee.
And to become a major stockholder.
Oh, yeah.
So, we have these, and I agree with Webster Tarpley here, we have essentially these Venetian methods being imported. Now, I do think that there is a deeper detailed story that you can actually find the influence of Venice in the detailed history during these periods. Tarpley's written about it, other people have written about it, I've written a little bit about it in this upcoming book. And believe me, it's hard to find details that Tarpley's missed. I certainly don't agree with all of his analysis or anything like that, but he has, I think, a major claim to his credit, and that's in stating the overall outline of that case. I think that there is a case there to be made. But I go about making it rather differently and in different paint by number strokes here. But the point here is that you have this Venetian influence on the British. To the extent that, Shakespeare's writing plays about it. One of them is all about the merchants of Venice.
Yes.
Okay, and there are other Venetian references in other parts of his plays. And incidentally, I don't think Shakespeare is Shakespeare. In other words, I don't think he wrote these things. You find the Venetians had a first for Western Europe in that, like their Byzantine mentors, they relied a lot on intelligence, on covert operations, and on diplomatic missions to virtually every corner of the world. Well, this the British pick up on, of course. Elizabeth I, most definitely, made use of these methods. So there's this influence going on there, the Dutch as well. So, you have something that's transplanted to Great Britain. I don't think it's necessarily
natural.
I don't. In other words, it's not some inherently corrupt part of the British psyche or
Well, I don't know. Back in the days of Braveheart and the first night business of taking a man's bride by the king is pretty sick.
Well, there's lots of sick things in every European tradition. I mean, if you dig and scratch long enough, what I'm trying to get at here is, by saying that, is it's not some some moral deficiency in English blood, the same way, you can't blame, there's not some moral deficiency in German blood that caused the Nazis, or in French blood that caused Napoleon. That I don't see. It's concepts, it's institutions that get handed down for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these things are very, very old. Again, like that old connection I pointed out to you when we paused earlier.
Yeah.
To tell you things off the record.
Yeah, oh boy. Oh, I wish I didn't know it.
Well.
Oh my gosh, Joseph. That's
it's
dangerous.
It's better to connect those dots.
Yeah.
And at least let people see what the possibilities are.
Yeah.
Than to let them go unstated.
Yes, that I agree. That's true.
If there is a deep connection, an old connection in what I told you,
yeah,
then that explains a lot of anomalous behavior through the centuries.
Boy.
So, yeah, it's. I'll be honest. To me, GeorgeAnn, it's looking like my model that I adopted back in the Cosmic War. That you have two surviving elites that have been scrambling to regain hegemony ever since, and that sometimes they cooperate with each other and other times they fight each other.
Yeah.
To me, that model looks more and more true every day. Not simply as a matter of a cosmological principle, but or a sociological one, but simply as kind of a matter of history.
Yeah.
It's looking more interesting.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about the EU? I mean, now
well, I think it's fascist.
Yeah, and they've got the Greeks paying 40% taxes.
Well,
good grief.
At one time under the socialists in Sweden, it was almost 100%.
Yeah. But this is today, Joseph.
Yeah, I know.
It's like they're trying to bleed people to death.
Yeah. It's, all I can say, GeorgeAnn, is that the irrationality of it is so palpable and so blatant.
Yeah.
And ultimately, hear my words carefully, evil.
Yes.
That it will not work.
Amen. I hope and pray for that, because too many people are suffering, dying.
Yeah.
My God, Joseph, it's just insane.
The real problem, GeorgeAnn, is what comes after. The real problem is when they step in with the, quote, solution.
Oh, boy.
That's when people really need to pay attention.
Oh.
Remember, the fulfillment is the deception.
Yes. And the solution is to kill off a bunch of people.
Well, that's what some people argue, that's what they're really up to.
Yeah.
There's every plot and conspiracy theory out there.
Well, let's look at the chemtrails.
Let's not.
Oh.
Stop.
Okay.
Let me get out what I was going to say before we went off on that. Because for one thing, I don't study that. I don't put anything in it or against it.
Yeah.
All right. The global population reduction thing could also be viewed, and I hope people are paying attention here, could also be viewed as deliberate fear-mongering, as deliberate social engineering.
Yeah.
In other words, it's not really an intentional goal. It's just to get everybody distracted and in fear. And again, the fulfillment is the deception. You've got to understand that many of these apocalyptic fear-mongering memes are there for a social engineering purpose.
Yes. Yes. Oh, my God.
You're dealing essentially with people who, in my opinion, are very, very knowledgeable or understanding of the fact that the black arts are primarily about social engineering.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes, they are.
Again, remember the long association of financial oligarchies with religion.
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
Divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is at a certain point in human history, we had the invention of a new kind of religion, one that was based, it was claimed, on a special revelation to certain selected messengers by God himself.
Yeah.
Now, that's the newcomer on the block.
Yep. No. Oh, my gosh. Oh, Joseph.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
Good grief. Well, it is huge. No matter how you slice it, it's huge.
Right. And again, people have to understand what you and I are doing on these shows, particularly in topics like this, is we are speculating.
Yes.
I can be very, very wrong in about any number of things or the way I'm looking at things. I am trying to get people to be extremely cautious of those who claim fulfillments are happening.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely.
Because of some sort of special teaching or interpretation of a phenomenon which in essence itself can be staged to be fulfilled.
Yeah. They've even got pictures of lightning striking
Yes.
Yeah. I
mean, I know.
Well,
lightning, I'll tell you an interesting thing. When Pius IX held his council during Vatican I to proclaim himself infallible, this council was held in 1870.
Yeah.
And it had to adjourn because of the Franco-Prussian War. So the council never really officially ended. It just, the court was adjourned and they never came back to court.
Yeah.
But they promulgated these decrees concerning the papal office. Well, when the decree on infallibility and the universal jurisdiction was decreed, there was a horrendous thunderstorm in Rome.
Yeah.
At that very moment.
Wow.
So someone may be trying to send them a message. And being Eastern Orthodox, we've been trying to send them that message for 1,000 years.
Of time.
Yeah, eons of time.
Gee.
And that's one thing that I do appreciate about my days in the Orthodox Church was, it did allow you to see that this whole papal thing was at least highly questionable.
Yeah.
If not an outright lie.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you get German and French Roman Catholic bishops going to the First Vatican Council and they're having difficulties with it. There was a famous bishop in the United States, I forget what his name was. He was the bishop, I think, of Little Rock, Roman Catholic bishop, that went to the council of Vatican I, and he came back, and he refused to promulgate the decisions of the council. He just refused.
Wow.
So in other words, there were Roman Catholics, few and far between, but there were Roman Catholic hierarchs that refused to accept those decrees.
Well, God bless them.
Yeah.
Oh, gee.
Yeah. Archbishop Duponlu that I mentioned earlier, he came back from Vatican I, and his comment was, the Pope has made acolytes out of us all.
Oh, gee. Gosh.
So anyway.
Oh. Well, another topic, the drones.
Yeah.
What in the world, Joseph? There are literally thousands of them scheduled to be in our skies.
Yeah. Well, I certainly don't view it as a good thing. It's just another step on this police state, snitch state that the oligarchy is trying to put into place. But the problem is that, technology is marching almost as fast as they can do anything.
Do you know that the German kids have made a game out of going around busting the spy cameras that they've got up in Germany?
Oh yeah, and that's trust me, that's gonna spread.
Yeah.
That's gonna spread.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that it would begin in Germany.
Yeah.
Because, this nation, of all the people in the world that have had an experience, and a bad one,
yes,
with a totalitarian regime that came into power claiming to protect everybody and making them secure, it's the Germans.
Yes.
But, it's going to spread.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard here and there of isolated incidents in France like this. But anyway, and I think it'll spread to this country. But anyway, what I wanted to get to about the drones is the technology, and I have a blog coming up about this. The technology is going almost faster than they can deploy the technologies that they want to put into place.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I have a blog coming up about a fashion designer in New York.
Yeah.
That's taking some of these new invisibility materials.
Yeah.
And devising stealth clothing
yes.
for anti-drone purposes. So in other words, the drones won't be able to see you. So in other words, we're on the old penetration power versus armor battle again.
Yes.
For every defensive step, then the opponent makes an upgrade to the offensive technology, which promotes an upgrade to the ultimately, GeorgeAnn, I think if they were to put into place the most egregious type of global tyranny, ultimately it's going to fail.
Yeah, it has to. And
the reason why humans are made for freedom.
Yes.
Humans are made for love.
Yes.
And what they, the Rockefellers, the Brzezinskis, the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, the Kuhns, the Geithners, all of these financial oligarchs, these are basically empty, lost souls.
Yeah, they certainly are.
It's like I said earlier, look at what these people have to live like. Look what they're doing now, or attempting to do. They're living in such fear.
Yes, they are.
That, it takes an article in Pravda, of all places, in Russia, to tell the Americans, hang on to your guns because look what happened to us when the Bolsheviks came after ours.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And, how the worm has turned for Pravda to be writing articles like that.
Oh, my gosh.
And the same thing in Germany. I think that business of the German kids going around smashing cameras, well, good for the German kids,
Yeah. It's not picture-taking cameras that people carry around.
No, I know what you're talking about. It's the surveillance cameras, the stoplight cameras, and the...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And they've made a game out of it.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, God bless those kids.
And I think it'll spread.
Oh, yeah, I
think it will spread.
I'm sure it will, Joseph. Oh, my gosh.
I don't know what else to say. It's been tried time and time again in human history. The idea of tyranny, central planning, all of this stuff, it doesn't work.
No.
Doesn't work.
No, it certainly doesn't. You'd think that they would learn after a while that it doesn't work.
Well, when you're power mad and this is the only life you know.
Oh, dear.
No, you're incapable of learning. I've said over and over again, when these elites buy the science to support their climate change, global warming things, or buy experts that tell them, well, Tesla's wireless transmission of power idea is really impractical. All of this stuff. When you have to buy your own data and its interpretation, you're living in a make-believe world.
Oh, yeah.
And the only way to secure your position is to make everybody else believe the same thing.
Oh, gee.
So you create this insane matrix-like world, and, when people don't believe in the same thing, well, then you better go grab their guns and put surveillance cameras on corners and do it in the name, on stoplights, and do it in the name of keeping everybody safe and protected from terrorism, because those evil Muslims are going to flood the streets any minute now.
Oh, gee. The boogeyman thing is getting old.
Yeah, well, the Jews didn't work out too well. We had to have a bigger enemy, than that. So, the Muslims are handy.
Yeah.
Because they're sitting on top of quote unquote our oil.
Oh, gee. And now we're in Africa, for God's sake. Oh.
Well, yeah.
Good grief.
Africa. This is the other significant thing. Africa's becoming an interesting centerpiece to all of this. With Peter Cardinal Turkson and his possibility of being elected as Pope. So it's going to be. We live in interesting times.
Oh yeah, as the Chinese say.
As the Chinese say.
Oh wow. Oh Joseph, it really is. To me, at least, it's very disturbing what is going on in the world. It just seems like we've poked our nose into everything, everywhere, and we're not popular.
No, of course not. No nation that attempts to be the unipolar axis of the world is popular.
Right.
The only thing being number one does is it makes everybody else want to take you down a notch or two.
Yeah.
Germany found that out. England found that out for a while. France found that out. No one, and every time there's a number one, they attempt to dictate to everybody else. The problem has been that the United States, you had a kind of softer British approach for a while, but then you had, I think, a faction take gradual grip on things shortly after the end of World War II, and that grip has done nothing but expand.
Yeah.
And there's no other word for it than, they call it neocons in the popular press, but the reality of that rogue group and their world outlook, it's nothing but fascism.
Yes.
That's all it is.
And we have Americans that actually agree with that kind of stuff.
This is the tragedy to me, GeorgeAnn.
Yeah.
Because, it's been, I've been very fortunate in my life. I've known a lot of German people. I've known a lot of Russian people and Spanish people and Mexican people and Italian people and Greek people and French people and British people and Canadian people and Australian people and on and on. I've known people from a lot of different countries. Japanese. And never in my dealings with any of these representatives of their nations have I found these people to be bad,
You're right.
evil, wishing ill on anyone else. In every instance, it has been a human culture. And this country used to be that way. We used to have the philosophy of helping each other. There wasn't this modern American, we're going to kick you out when you're 18 years old, better go and get, Now our children or our elders are an inconvenience.
Yes.
And I honestly don't understand the mentality. I think a lot of it came in the post-war period with that generation and the promotion of materialism. I think the sellout began there. That in order to be successful, you had to be a consumer.
Yeah, and
prove it.
And step on your mother's head.
Yeah, exactly.
Gee.
The ethic changed profoundly during and as a result of World War II, and it's gotten much, much worse.
Yes.
We're living in a very, very barbaric country in certain respects.
Yes.
You see it in power in Washington in both parties.
Oh, yeah.
This is why I'm much more concerned about the culture than I am about the system.
Yes.
Or fixing the system. I think it's interesting that many commentators in this country on both the left and the right are increasingly coming right out and saying the system is broken and it can't be fixed.
Well, Joseph, what if somehow we dumped the de facto government and started over?
Well,
is that what it's going to take?
One way or another, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But the problem is who's going to do the replacing?
Yeah.
I don't see. I certainly don't think that any of the solutions that anybody's talking about right now in this country, and I certainly, I don't know what's going on in Europe. I know that there's a lot of people, even at the parliamentary level of the European Parliament, that are just pissed off.
Oh, yeah.
There's just no other way. We think we've got an unresponsive government over here. Go watch the European Parliament.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the MPs in the European Parliament, talking about the unresponsiveness of their European entity.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, of course, they like to boast that the EU was created kind of along American principles. Well, what does that tell you about the nature of the system over here?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, here, we'll give you our version of unresponsive government. I think the first step, GeorgeAnn, is people in this country have to take the long view. That we've got to preserve the best of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And by it, I don't necessarily mean American culture. I simply mean Western culture.
Yes.
Be that, if you're Scandinavian, it'll be Scandinavian American culture you're preserving, and if you're Hispanic, it'll be Hispanic American culture you're preserving, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
The second thing I think is, sooner or later, a real second party has to emerge.
Yeah.
Am I in favor of a two-party system? Yeah, you betcha, if we really had one.
Yeah, that's true.
We haven't had one.
Yeah.
I do think that there's an interesting phenomenon happening right now. I think the Republican Party is doomed.
Yeah.
I really do. There's been some commentators talking about this. I haven't participated in an election since Bush the First.
Yeah.
Because, I saw the handwriting on the wall with that character, and what was going to happen, and it has.
Yes.
The Republican Party, some people are saying, some commentators, and I fully agree with them, it's going to go the way of the Whigs.
Oh, boy.
The demographics are against it. You have a Republican establishment that will not change.
Mm-hmm.
The real problem is for me, the Democrats, because They have a party that's done the same thing. They talk a good progressive talk, but when it comes to walking the walk, they don't.
Yes, you're right.
You know, they talk about the party of the people, and they kill babies. They talk about being against a war, you know, all these wars, and they start more of them and drop more bombs and drones on people's heads.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and you know, a more responsive government, and they create Obamacare. And, you know, sooner or later, unless a certain commentator in this country is right that these people are mentally ill, sooner or later there has to be a bunch of pissed off Democrats too that are tired of their party doing exactly what the Republican Party does and selling out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think once that happens, you're going to see a genuinely centrist party emerge.
Wow.
This is what always bothered me about the Republican Party. You know, it's nice to talk about free markets, but what they've really meant by that is mercantilism and allowing big corporations to shift the manufacturing base of this country overseas to cheap labor.
Yeah.
And, you know, turn the country into the mess it is in now.
Yeah.
And at the same time, these countries employ subsistence labor, child labor, you know, what amounts to slave labor. Well, by golly, I'm sorry, this is where I part company with the Republican Party.
Yeah.
The Democrats were right during the 19th century to attempt to support some ameliorated institutions to look after the legitimate interests of working people so that they weren't exploited by rapacious corporations. I'm sorry. That's something that the Democrats did that was absolutely principled, in my opinion. In other words, I'm not one of these free market libertarian ideologues.
Right.
By the same token, I can't bring myself to vote for a party that at any point in its history has the moral stain of supporting slavery.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this is like pulling the lever for Nazi if you were to encounter it in the toll booth, in the voting booth.
Yes.
You know, they could sit and tell you, well, you know, that was way back then, and, you know, we're new and improved and reformed now. We don't do those nasty things anymore. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm still not voting for you.
Go take a look.
Yeah, go take a look.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh my gosh. Just...
You know, if we hold an institution responsible, you know, if we're going to talk about outlawing the Nazis for what they did, why aren't we holding morally accountable this damnable political party?
Well, the judges won't go along with it.
Well, this is the other problem. This is why I'm saying, in order for there to be a fixed system, there have to be real options that come from the people that the system supposedly represents.
Yeah.
What we have now is a corrupt oligarchy, and it's serving only itself, and in the process, it's ruining its own base of power. This is what they don't get.
Yeah. Yeah. Wall Street's going to go down. Oh, and send a lot of people packing, I'll tell you.
Well,
Joseph, what if we took personhood out of the corporation?
Oh boy, GeorgeAnn.
Well, I'm serious.
Well, GeorgeAnn, I know you are. In one sense, I really, really deeply appreciate where you're coming from, because I feel exactly the same way.
Yeah.
I really do. But in another sense, the mind would boggle at what you would have to do in terms of a sweeping paradigm change in our culture, because that's really what that's about.
Yeah.
And people don't realize how deeply, deeply, almost subliminal and subconscious this idea of corporate person really is.
Yeah.
When you put things that way, you have to start looking for its appearance even in your own unwitting thoughts.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about here. It is thus so deeply entwined into our institutions as Western culture, it would be virtually impossible to do.
I don't see that it's impossible to do, Joe, but
Hang
you
on,
just do it.
hang on.
Okay.
I would be much better at trying to answer this if we were already 2 hours into a show, because we could do semester long seminars on this topic. 3 hours a day for a week for 16 weeks on this topic, because that's how deep it is, and even then we'd only be skimming the surface.
Yeah.
This is what I mean when I say deeply entwined. Let me give you an example of how deeply entwined it is. During the Middle Ages, because of their understanding of the theological roots of the doctrine, and note what I just said.
Yes.
Because of their understanding of that, at certain points in medieval history and early Renaissance history, and in certain places where you had the beginnings of commerce associated with corporate charters, if there was criminal malfeasance on the part of corporate officers, oftentimes this could be punishable by death to the corporate officers.
Yeah.
In other words, they literally killed the corporation by killing the agencies, the personal agencies or human beings associated with it.
Well, I'm not exactly against that either.
Well,
when I see,
but you see, the logic here is very dangerous.
Yeah.
Because it's the same metaphysical basis that is behind the logic that says evil is systemic or rooted in a particular group of people who constitute a threat to the rest of us.
Yeah.
It's I'm telling you, the logic, the metaphysical logic behind the one is exactly the same as behind the other.
Oh.
So in other words, it's coming out of a conceptual root.
Yeah.
It's that root, once you strike at it, you discover you're hitting some interests that are very old and very powerful.
Well, that's what needs to be done.
Well, yeah, but you can't just barge in there. That's what I'm trying to get at here. This is like invading the Soviet Union in 1941. You've got to plan this out a bit. And you better have a pretty good plan, and you'd better stick with it and not get tempted by targets along the way.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what happened to Dolph. Okay.
Oh, dear.
So, because give the Russians time, they don't like their country being invaded.
Right.
Right. It may take them a while to react, but you want to have things planned out for a pretty long, good campaign. This can't be done willy-nilly. You can't just barge in there and say, well, we got to get rid of the idea of corporate person in law. You just can't do it.
Yeah.
And it is deeply culturally entwined, and that's why you have to look at the metaphysical root of it, and then look at its application in different contexts, and decide whether or not you want to roll those things back or not. Let's be honest. The modern corporation is doing a great deal of harm.
Yeah.
It's doing a great deal of inhumane things.
Yes.
But on the other side of the coin, it is responsible for doing a great deal of good. The lives that you and I lead in this modern world are to a great extent due to corporations and to what they make possible in terms of private, common, voluntarily united human effort.
Like what?
The telephone you and I are talking on.
That should be free.
Oh no, GeorgeAnn, no, I totally disagree. I totally disagree. Everything should be free. We know where that leads. The fact that we have a mechanism for driving human progress. The problem is this mechanism has coupled itself not to voluntary corporate associations anymore, but to the coercive power of the state. This is classical fascism.
Yeah. Well, how many times have I said, Joseph, that water, the basics of life, should be free to every human being?
Well, that's the logic behind Obamacare, isn't it?
No.
Ultimately it is. It's designed for single payer.
$22,000 per
I know,
family.
but you missed what I just said. It's designed to lead to a single payer system. I can tell you, having lived in those countries, that those systems aren't all they're cracked up to be.
Oh, no.
And the other problem is, lest we forget, medical costs started to soar in this country when? When did they really start to pick up?
Oh, they've always been.
They've always been high, but
yeah.
when did it really start to kick off on that hyperbolic growth?
I don't really know.
Remember Lyndon Baines Johnson?
It's always been out of my reach.
Remember Lyndon Baines Johnson?
Oh, yeah.
Go back and look at the statistics of medical costs after Medicare, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, and all of that was put into place under Lyndon Johnson. Go back and look.
Yeah.
This, I wouldn't even be opposed, I don't think, to a certain amount of socialized medicine.
Mm-hmm.
The problem I have with it is that any time, and the reason I'm so adamantly opposed to it, is that any time that the government gets involved, it literally is going to tell you when you're healthy enough to be saved or not.
Yeah.
I lost a sister to brain cancer that I'm quite positive under Obamacare would have been denied care.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I had someone, a typical, and I say that as an anecdote because the dummy crooks in this country are all the time appealing to anecdotes like that to justify the moral high ground that they assume they're on. Well, it's not moral high ground to me.
Right.
And someone used that. They said that their friends had already been saved and helped because Obamacare had passed. Well, number one, it was somebody that basically worships the man.
Yeah.
And I was so nauseated and insulted that they would use a friend's story to make a political point.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, touche, I can do the same thing too. The problem is the government will only its involvement with its ability to run the printing press will only drive up costs.
Oh yeah.
And secondly, it's going to tell you who and how much care, who you have to see and how much care you're able to get.
Yeah.
Rest assured, the generals in the Pentagon and the directors of the CIA will get a heck of a lot, and you can rest assured Congress people will get a lot better care than you and I.
Oh, yeah.
Because they always manage to exempt themselves from the rules. If it's so good, they themselves ought to be under it. If they're not, then you've created titlements of nobility.
Yeah.
And that's what this country is supposed to be against.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry if you're dummy crooks listening to that. Too bad. I'm not with you. I'm not with you on your party's track record. I'm not with you on your party's claim to morality. It's not. You're only about power. And the same thing to the Republic thugs.
Oh, yeah.
Neither of these parties represent the people.
Right.
They represent corporate interests. That's what Obamacare is about.
Yeah, well, yes. Well, Joseph, $20-some thousand for a family of 4 per year.
It's obscene.
Yes, And if you can't pay it,
Too bad.
you're fined. And if you
And
can't pay the damn fine, you go to jail.
And then they force you into the... Yeah, I know.
It's
the
sick.
only... What's going to happen is they have to not fund this, and
Right.
states themselves have to not fund it. Just simply refuse.
Well, Oklahoma has said that they will incarcerate anybody that tries to do that. To fund that thing for 5 years.
Well, if that's what they're saying in Oklahoma, good for them.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't see much, and, I'm really not a politician or a social scientist or anything like this. I really don't like even talking about political things in this detail. But I just cannot see the way forward with any of the solutions that these two current political parties, and they're really but one party.
Yes.
With two heads.
Yeah, they got like a bird has two wings.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. It's the same thing, and I really don't see. We need a genuine second party.
Yes.
That represents the interests of the people, not the interests of the financial oligarchy. I mean, come on. When Barack Obama's one of his biggest supporters is George Soros, and you think this man is concerned about the people? No, he's bought and paid for by the same financial oligarchy, and in Soros' case, one with a very, very clouded, murky moral background.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. You can take your Obama messianism and put it where the sun don't shine. I'm not on board with this. Never have been. I'm not on board with the so-called, we've got to get a good conservative candidate, like Mitt Romney and
oh dear, oh gosh,
or George Bush, or it's just all theater.
Yeah.
Just
and a decent man can't run.
Well.
Because
they can run, but they can't get anywhere.
Yeah. Because of the cost.
Well, that's the other thing. The cost alone should tell us that these candidates are wholly in the hands of the oligarchy. That what you're looking at is theater.
Mm-hmm.
And the candidates are pre-selected, and all your vote does is tell them which one to make their sock puppet for the next 4 years. This is why, the system is there, and it's kind of fun to watch from time to time, but do anything with it? No.
Gee, Joseph. I am genuinely frightened for this country and the people in it.
I am too.
And especially with this Obama crap care that's...
Well, it's Obromniak care. Let's remember something. I'm not trying to pick on Obama or the Democrats here. Let's remember that this mandated clause was the brainchild of the Heritage Foundation, the supposed big Republithug conservative think tank.
Yeah.
Let's remember that, Obromny up there in Massachusetts, and I like to call them that, Barmid Obromniak, because there's really not a dime's worth of difference between the two.
Yeah.
He instituted this mandated provision in Massachusetts.
Hmm.
So, he was running against his own record there. And this ought to tell you something about the so-called Republican opposition to all of this. It's not coming from the grassroots. It's, they're genuinely opposed to it. But the Republican establishment, they're all part of the same crew, same crowd.
Yes.
So, This people ask me, well, you got to vote. It's your patriotic duty. And I am voting. I'm voting by saying this party and that party do not represent me and therefore don't earn my vote.
Exactly the way I feel, Joseph.
They do not earn my vote.
Wow. That's exactly the way I feel, and I do not vote because of it.
people think I'm nuts for not voting Democratic because at one time in their party's history they supported slavery. But my God, what a hideous institution!
Yeah.
What are you saying? You cast a vote for those people.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Be institutionally connected to anything but an institution or a party that supported something that hideous.
Yeah.
I don't care on what grounds they supported it. To me, it's just hideous.
Yes, it is.
And
it's deadly.
And of course it is. Deadly in so many ways that aren't even calculable.
Yeah.
You're closing off the creativity of a whole segment of your population.
Yes, that's true.
The very people that might be able to help you out of a mess. It's just nuttiness to me, GeorgeAnn. It's an immorality. It's a nuttiness.